After the boom comes the reality check. AI is now part of our lives. Regulators are looking to keep tabs on the biggest players. The tech titans are now looking to make money from it. And we're still wondering, is it the end of civilization as we know it, or just the start of something incredible? Yahoo Finance dove into it all, speaking with industry leaders to break down what's next in the space and how you can make money in it. Here's a look at some of the top moments from our week-long series, The AI Revolution.
The 2024 election ramps up. There was a robocall that sounded like President Biden and urged people not to vote in the New Hampshire primary, and that's fueling calls for regulation. Now, the source of the call remaining unknown. We want to bring in Nina Schick, author and advisor specializing in generative AI. Nina, it's great to have you here. And going off of what Rick was just saying, the threat that AI potentially poses here to the 2024 election, how big of a risk do you think this is? Put in perspective for our viewers.
Yeah, great to be joining you today. I think that AI is just kind of the latest thing that poses a challenge in an increasingly corroded information ecosystem, right? Long before AI was even in the game, we saw how mis and disinformation can spread like wildfire online. And that includes, not even very sophisticated content, just a crudely edited video, a video that's been slowed down, or even an authentic video that's simply been miscontextualized. But of course, what is now different from 2016 or 2020 is that the so-called capabilities of generative AI, which include the ability to use artificial intelligence, right, to generate synthetic video that can perfectly clone human biometrics, has become far more accessible. So yes, Joe Biden can be cloned, President Trump can be cloned. We've already been seeing a lot of these synthetic videos in the political sphere. But more than that, I think this is the core question or the core challenge. When people start to understand that anything can be synthetic, anything can be AI generated, anything can be faked, they begin to lose trust in everything. So you lose trust in the electoral process. You lose trust in the result. You become completely cynical. And I think that is one of the core challenges we're facing, not only in the internet age, but even augmented with the AI age now.
And Nina, this year we spoke to a lot of business leaders at Davos about the future of AI. I want to play this quick clip for you. Here's what they had to say.
AI can be used for all, it can be used for cyber attacks. It can be used to design a bioterrorism weapon. Whenever we have new technologies, they're used to achieve positive goals and for some challenging things as well.
We have spent a lot of time creating these computing engines that you can run AI on the devices that are battery power at the edge. Phone, PC, the AI PC, and cars.
If I had to predict, I would say 2024 is going to be kind of the year of the AI letdown.
So in an election year, we're already anticipating it's going to be extremely vitriolic, divisive. How can we ensure that, at least here in the U.S., especially when we know globally, this is going to be a record election year with some of the campaigning and elections and polls that are going to be open elsewhere around the world? How can we here ensure that we're ahead of some of the largest risks, as the erosion of trust that you just mentioned is certainly on one of the kind of dockets for that largest risk too?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Huge year globally. I think it's something like 40% of the population goes to the poll, not least in the United States as well. Look, I'm not too optimistic about the short-term outlook, at least politically, not only in the United States, but in many other parts of the world. I think that divisiveness, the polarization is certainly going to continue to be a core feature of whoever wins the election in the United States. Nonetheless, I think that is indicative of something broader afoot. And I think that's largely to do with, again, we've seen how in this era of exponential technology, economies are changing, the balance of power is shifting. I think the United States, interestingly, has a lot of economic power and stands to really capitalize on exponential technologies, including artificial intelligence. However, am I optimistic that the political debate in the United States and other countries is going to be less divisive? No. But again, I think this is indicative of our traditional systems of government and our public institutions no longer being able to stand up to the challenges of an exponential age. And therefore, there's this declining trust in the process.
Nina Schick, author, speaker, specializing in generative AI. Nina, always a pleasure to get some of your insights here. We're going to hope for the best here on the generative AI front, at least in this election and future ones as well. We appreciate the time.
Wave of artificial intelligence lawsuits are starting to pile up in America's courtrooms. And one of those wider-known lawsuits was filed last month, just days before heading into 2024. The New York Times sued Microsoft and OpenAI, the startup behind ChatGPT, over copyright infringement. The paper alleging millions of its articles were used to train AI programs and wants the companies to be held accountable for, quote, billions of dollars in statutory and actual damages. So could lawsuits like this rewrite the rules of AI? For more on how copyright law could threaten the AI industry is Ryan Abbott, LLP partner at Brown, Mary Smith and Kahn. Thank you for joining us this morning. So I want to first draw the distinction between the copyright issues and the patent issues, and really the questions that are being raised and not being covered by existing law.
No, thanks so much for having me. Well, what we're fundamentally seeing is this new sort of activity where you have machines that are behaving like people and legal systems that were designed with human-centric concepts. And so in the patent context, for example, we're asking if a company like Novo Nordisk uses AI to develop Wegovy or Ozempic, can they patent something like that? Or do you need a traditional human inventor? And this may be an issue where you have tech companies licensing drug discovery models to big pharma companies, and the people using the models don't really know how they work or how the output is validated, but it's generating useful output. And so this really questions some fundamental tenets of our IP system. In copyright, you have similar sorts of concerns. So one is if you're using something like Midjourney or Stable Diffusion, and you say, I'd like a graphic for Yahoo Finance, and it gives you a piece of artwork, whether you could copyright that or Yahoo can copyright that. And that case, the New York Times case, is one of many that have been brought recently against AI developers. And that case is alleging a number of things, but one of them is that it is copyright infringement to train AI models on copyright protected content without permission. So OpenAI, for their large language models, uses massive amounts of data that they've scraped from the internet. It would be, they allege, impossible or impractical to license that information because there's so many parties and there would be holdouts and the cost would be impractical. And in the US, it's an open question right now whether that is permitted under copyright law, whether it is infringement or permissible under a standard we call fair use. Because there are a lot of exceptions to copyright infringement, for example, a human being training on information.
Ryan, let's hone in on the part about patents, because you did testify before Congress and you've called for sort of an overhaul of the current patent law in place. You take that first example you just had about a pharmaceutical company developing a product with the assistance of AI or utilizing AI. What does current law say about who owns the patent and how does that need to change?
Sure. Well, right now, most inventors don't own their patents. So Novo Nordisk may, employ large teams of research scientists. At the end of the day, the company will generally own that patent. And it is not uncommon in drug discovery to have collaborations between multiple companies, and they'll work out who owns it by contract, and that can be kind of complicated. When an AI gets involved, it gets potentially a little bit trickier as you're asking, who is the inventor? Because we need an inventor to have someone own a patent. The right goes to the inventor, and then it goes to who they've assigned the invention to or who's entitled to it. And you could potentially have a lot of people doing complex things in this scenario. Again, someone can be building a drug discovery model. Someone can be training it on a particular data set. Someone can be using it to generate output. Someone else could be validating the output. And there really isn't law right now on, well, who in that is the inventor? And it can make a big difference to ownership if those individuals are at different companies, especially if they don't have contracts in place or if there's open source models. But right now, the law is, and this is recent as of last year, if you don't have someone that you can say that person made an inventive contribution, you can't get a patent right now. And some companies like Siemens have reported that they've been unable to apply for patent applications where human beings involved in this process have said, I didn't do anything inventive. This is just AI output, and it was obviously valuable, and I'm not an inventor. So as AI does more and more in R&D the way it's doing right now in the creative industry, this is an increasing risk for businesses that use AI in R&D.
So Ryan, let's say that the law is changed so that a company or individual that owns the AI system can in fact own the patent for any inventions that come through the system. To what extent does that stifle innovation, particularly around the smaller players? Because the argument is that the bigger companies that are out there can fight some of these lawsuits. That's not necessarily the case for some other players.
Sure. Well, it's hard to say how this is going to develop. In the creative industry, to a certain extent, the release of these powerful AI models has really helped to democratize creativity. So I have very little creative skill, but if I wanted to make a graphic novel or even a short film, I could use generative AI platforms to help me do something that in the past, realistically only a music or a movie studio could produce. So it may be that the release of, more powerful AI models does return some power to SMEs that are looking to innovate. But on the theory that we have further industry consolidation and there's, a few large pharma companies and a few large tech companies that are driving a lot of AI-enabled innovation. Fundamentally, I think that would still be a pretty good social outcome because, you would have then Pfizer and GSK churning out new drugs, reducing the pipeline for validating those drugs' work, resulting in everyone getting a lot more socially valuable innovation, which is really what the system's designed to do. And it's something where large players do have an advantage right now, including because they can afford the costs of prosecuting patents and litigating them, which can be quite costly.
And Ryan, how do you quantify harm in this situation? I know for Anthropic, one of their defenses was that they were looking for their accuser to show harm. But say you repurpose a picture, you've used AI to generate an image or a product. How do you end up quantifying harm if perhaps they're not making a profit off of it? How does that end up playing out?
Sure. Well, copyright law is different in every jurisdiction. In the United States, there are statutory damages for copyright infringement and for willful infringement. So someone, essentially knew something was protected by copyright and just didn't care and went ahead with it. You have six-figure statutory damages. So you don't need, in those instances, to prove actual harm. And depending on how you're calculating times of infringement, potentially the damages could be astronomical. This was an issue in the Google Books cases where Google was digitizing libraries and, Authors Guild and other entities alleged that was infringement, and there were potentially at least billions of dollars of damages on the table. Ultimately, the courts decided that was fair use. Alternately, one can seek actual damages, and that does generally require that one is being deprived of some sort of commercial opportunity. So for individuals who aren't commercially artists but have a moral objection to their works being trained on AI systems, and there are a number of such individuals, they generally be seeking statutory damages.
Switching gears, as AI dominates markets and earnings calls, new research shows 95% of workers say they see the value of working with it. Yet Accenture's data also shows over half fear job loss and stress. This concern is underscored by recent layoffs at Microsoft following the lead of Google, Amazon, and others. Now we have the author of that report, Paul Doherty, joining us for insights into navigating the AI revolution and how businesses can invest in the future. Paul, it is good to see you. I actually wanted to start maybe more high level, Paul. There's been this boom of interest in AI. Certainly investors are excited about it. Companies talk about the time and effort and money they're putting into this tech, Paul. But I'm interested, as you kind of survey the landscape right now, how do you see companies putting that technology to work right now, Paul? What are the use cases that you see out there that get your attention?
Yeah, thanks for having me on the program. And it's a great question. I think we're in the midst of a shift in terms of how companies are viewing AI now, generative AI especially. I'd look at 2023 as the year of education and experimentation. After all, it was only 14 months or so ago when ChatGPT burst on the scene. And we've done over 700 generative AI projects for clients. And that's a wide array across industries around the world. And what we're seeing is a shift to more companies move from that experimentation to scale. And we really see 2024 as the year when executives are looking to see the results, see the impact, and see the value they can drive at scale. So some of the use cases that I'm excited about that we're working with companies on are areas like drug discovery in life sciences, where you compare a scientist with generative AI models that understand chemistry and biology and can dramatically accelerate the drug discovery process. Very exciting. All the way to examples like in customer service, where we're applying generative AI today to help customer service agents respond to queries faster, more productivity, get better results to customers, and really dramatically increase the satisfaction that customers are getting. So kind of a win-win all around. And the interesting thing from some of those examples is the workers enjoy the work better because it removes some of the drudgery. It allows them to really focus on relationships and interaction and the things they like to do.
Paul, as Josh alluded to, we've also seen some redeployment of resources, right? We have heard about some layoffs this year. Accenture itself did some layoffs last year, as well as companies trying to figure out where to put the resources. What strikes me, though, is I've heard a lot of reassurances about how AI is going to make workers' jobs more productive, easier. But the folks who are being let go are not being retrained to do AI jobs. They're just being let go. And then other AI people are being hired, is the way I'm seeing it. Is that what's going on here?
Well, we're early in the cycle, and that's what the report that we released showed, is that workers are optimistic. 95% of the workers surveyed do believe generative AI can help their careers, and they're excited to learn more about it. But 60% of them have anxiety about whether the company's going to bring them along with it. Then you look at the company side of it. It's a different story where the C-suite executives that we surveyed don't see the broad release of people. They see the need to bring the people along. So we call it the trust gap that's forming, and there's a need for leaders to be better painting the vision of what they're doing, maybe be a little bit more transparent, and then companies to invest in the learning platforms to bring the workers along. So while companies and leaders want to bring the workers along, only about 5% of companies are investing in those learning platforms and education at scale. That number needs to go a lot higher to address the need for workers we're going to have. The reality is you're not going to be able to get rid of today's workers and hire tomorrow's workers because the skills are changing so fast that the companies that win are going to be those that understand how to train and develop the learning program to bring the workers along with them and add the new skills that you need in this new generative AI world, the prompt engineering and other skills that are going to be table stakes for any job in the future.
What is it, Paul, about AI that helps companies here more than the tech they already have in place?
Yeah, it's important to step back and realize, and I've been doing this for over 3 decades and have seen every one of these waves come through. There hasn't been anything like generative AI over that period of time. It is different and it has a different level of impact. The reason is, one, the speed, 14 months to the scale of impact we're seeing. A second is this human-like nature of the technology. It's the first technology that's like looking in the mirror in terms of what it can do, in terms of creating content, its other capabilities. And as a result of that, it changes everything that people do. So the job of the CEO, the C-suite, the manufacturing worker, the frontline workers, everybody's jobs are going to change as a result of this. And that's what's really different about it. And therefore, we believe what's happening and what needs to happen is companies need to reinvent work itself and how it happens. And that then changes the role that people have. So it'll be about how do you develop those new skills. Think back to the internet when it came out. Before the internet, we didn't have web designers, e-commerce experts, search engine optimizers. We didn't have eBay, Etsy, entrepreneurs building new businesses around the internet. That's the new creation we're going to see. We've identified 12 new jobs that didn't exist a year ago that we're building and hiring within our company as we grow our AI talent from 40,000 to 80,000. And that's just the tip of the iceberg as you look at enabling everyone to be able to participate in this generative AI-driven business world and economy.
Paul, finally, I want to ask you about what you train the models on, right? There's been some copyright questions, right, about the data that some of the models are pulling from. We saw that play out, for example, with the Hollywood strikes. So how do you approach that and make sure that you have the rights to the data that you're training stuff on?
Yeah, we announced a $3 billion investment last year in data and AI to build the capabilities that companies will need as they move through this journey. And one of them is exactly what you said. How do you choose the right models and train the models right? There's over 600 models, different foundation models out there to choose from. So it's a bewildering array of choices that companies face, and there's strategic and investment and lots of implications in which models. And to your point on, you have to understand how the models are trained. There's decisions on proprietary models versus open source models. And that's one thing we're working through a lot of companies on is how do you make those choices? And then what degree of customization do you need to drive your business? Initially, companies were thinking, well, I'll just use the model and I'll do what's called retrieval augmented generation or prompt engineering to get the right results out of the model. And companies are now realizing that to drive really strategic results, they need to invest more in using some of their own data to fine tune or train the models to really drive that strategic impact. And that's with the investment we're making in different industries and different solutions, that's how we're trying to help companies move through that and do it in a safe way to avoid some of the risks that you have with as you mentioned, with intellectual property and other considerations.
Paul, it's great to catch up with you as always. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
All week, we are taking a deep dive into the AI revolution, how it's changing the way we live, work, and invest. Even today, we're seeing huge moves in the tech sector as it continues to rally on AI advancements. One company harnessing the latest technology is Boosted AI, uses machine learning to scan data, news, and trends to help make sense of your portfolio and predict what might happen next. Joshua Pantone, the company's co-founder and CEO, joins us now. Josh, it is great to have you on the show. And maybe, Josh, to start off with you, if you could explain to viewers kind of just a little bit more about your company and the AI product, Josh, the AI platform you offer asset managers and how they benefit from it.
Yeah, so we're a generative AI platform for professional investment managers. We power about 180 of some of the biggest asset managers in the world, collectively managing trillions in assets. Really, users are using our system to monitor holdings, kind of understand macro trends that are going to be impacting them, really accelerate, speed up their research process, analyze risk in ways we think really wasn't possible before, and just kind of across the entire investment workflow, really speed up and increase the efficiency of what they're doing.
Josh, it's Julie here. How, for years we've talked about Wall Street using algorithms, right? Which is a form of machine learning or AI, right? So how is what we're seeing now different from what we have seen?
Yeah, I think the biggest difference is the kind of data that you can draw from. Traditional models, we're really looking at this sort of numerical data. We think about things like revenue, earnings per share. Today, my company analyzes millions of articles from over 150,000 sources, and this could be anything from trade publications, 10Ks, 10Qs, to really big newspaper outings, and trying to sort of collect, analyze, and use that data in a really sophisticated, quantitative way was something that wasn't really possible with the older technology, but that you can do in a really sophisticated way now.
And Josh, I'm just curious, what is demand like for your AI product? And are there certain kinds of asset managers that seem to be more interested in it than others?
Yeah, I think one of the most exciting things for me is just how incredibly broad the appetite is. We have everything from investment advisors managing like 100 million in assets, all the way up to $1 trillion large asset managers, and globally sovereign wealth funds. And this is hedge funds, pod shops. The diversity of our clientele is actually probably the most exciting part of the story for me.
And so, Josh, what do they do with all of this, right? How is it being put to work right now? And what kind of, edge is it sort of surfacing?
Yeah, I really kind of break it down into one of two categories. One is basically information asymmetry. If you use a system like ours, you're going to be able to learn information a lot faster than if you use a system without ours. And the other side is really around efficiency of your process. We can take what used to be a 40-hour research process and get it down to 5 or 10 minutes. So it's kind of analyzing huge amounts of information, learning insights from it really fast, or taking something that was historically really slow and making that really fast.
And Josh, I'm interested, the asset managers who are interested in kind of incorporating this technology, some are going to you, Josh, but what are others doing? Are they buying pre-existing tech? Are they trying to build their own in-house AI platforms? Are they hiring people with the expertise to do it?
Yeah, I think there's kind of a mix of all of it. You're seeing people that are starting to build in-house teams, especially some of the larger players. You're seeing people that are going after more traditional providers. I guess the one comment I would make, though, is that if you're not actively trying to implement AI, I don't think AI is going to replace you, but a person using AI probably will. So there's kind of broad-based demand for it.
And sort of what investments are your platform surfacing related to AI?
Yeah, I'd say in the short term, there's kind of three main things. I think largely 2023 was a year of experimentation where people were trying to unlock value. As we shift forward thinking to 2024, it's really going to be about implementation. That experimentation is going to continue, but the implementation is going to be a big driver. So companies like AMD or Nvidia that are providing chipsets and computation that's key to building these techniques are still going to be really important. Infrastructure companies like AWS or Microsoft Azure that can service is going to be really important. And then early adopters of the technology are really going to see, we think, generational gaps in their capabilities versus people that don't use it.
And Josh, I would assume that there's, and I'm sure you're hearing more and more asset managers maybe talking about how they incorporate AI. For investors who are listening right now, though, how should they kind of help themselves distinguish between those managers, who are kind of just engaging in marketing hype, versus those who are real, who are actually getting it done?
I think the most exciting thing about this technology, and probably the most important thing to applying it to finance, is the ability to actually understand the reasoning of the machine. If we think about historic systems, they tend to be a black box. They say buy this stock or sell this stock, and you have really no idea why. With technology like this, it can give a detailed analysis on exactly where its reasoning comes from. It can cite the sources that led to the conclusion, and it can hopefully bubble up insights that are unique or very value add versus what you would get elsewhere. And so when I'm looking at providers, rather than think about, is it AI or not AI, I'd really be asking kind of across those three things. Is it giving me insights I haven't heard elsewhere? Is the reasoning something I can understand? Is it obvious where I can implement it in my workflow? And if the answer to those questions is yes, probably it's a big value add.
So interesting, Josh, to hear how more ways this technology makes its way into the financial services industry. Thanks so much for joining us today, Josh.
Well, lawmakers in the U.S. are pushing forward in their effort to regulate artificial intelligence. A group of nonpartisan congressmen unveiling a bill that would require federal agencies to abide by AI guidelines put forth by the Commerce Department last year. One of those behind the proposed bill, California Representative Ted Lieu, joins us now to discuss. Congressman, it's good to talk to you today. Let's talk about what's at stake first. What is the risk you are looking to address through this bill?
Thank you for your question. Let me first say that the S&P 500 closed at a record high last Friday. The Dow exceeded 38,000 for the first time in U.S. history yesterday. So the economic policies the Biden-Harris administration and Congress are working, and part of those policies includes making sure that artificial intelligence continues to innovate, but does so in a safe way that doesn't harm people.
So to follow up, though, specifically, Congressman, when you talk about this bill, what is the risk you are looking to address?
So what this bill does is it mandates that the standards set forth by the National Institute of Standards and Technology be applied to both the federal government as well as any companies that want to contract with the federal government. This is known as an AI risk management framework. It's already in existence in both the private sector and public sector. And what it does is it makes companies and institutions think about how they're using AI in their own corporations and their own organizations to make sure that it's safe, that there's AI governance that doesn't unnecessarily harm people, and it doesn't have effects that will really continue to harm either their company or their organization.
And Congressman, as we look at the comparisons to some of the EU legislation, theirs is more done on an impact assessment. How is it different, the legislation that you're putting through? How are you assessing how you're categorizing these AI risks?
So our bill is more process orientated. It makes these companies who want to contract the federal government, as well as the federal government itself, go through an entire process of thinking about AI, how they deploy it, how they test to see that it doesn't cause harm. how they go back and then try to fix it if in fact it is causing harm. So it's more process orientated. I also know that this bill is not only bipartisan, it's also bicameral, with Senators Moran and Warner having introduced it in the U.S. Senate as well.
And what is your expectation in terms of the timeline for passage or the potential for it?
So we unfortunately do have a House Republican caucus that is rather chaotic. Last year, we were just trying to prevent stupid stuff like government shutdowns and default our nation's debt. Now that we've managed to keep our lights on, hopefully we're going to be able to work on other issues such as AI regulation. And I'm hopeful that this bill can be passed sometime this year.
And Congressman, what does it mean in terms of trying to coordinate? Obviously, something like AI is essentially borderless. How do you coordinate that with other countries who are also taking sort of a piecemeal approach and have a very different set of rules depending on where you are?
That is a great question. Unfortunately, there's very little coordination right now. The UN is going to put together a summit later this year that's going to bring together all the countries of the world to have more coordination on artificial intelligence. Other thing we're going to see is these jurisdictions try different approaches to regulating AI. One of the things that lawmakers do is we plagiarize. And so we're going to look at how this AI regulation goes in Europe. If it goes well, we're going to copy it. If it's a disaster, we're not going to copy it. So it allows us a chance to also see how other jurisdictions try to regulate AI.
Artificial intelligence, just the very latest in terms of tech regulation that lawmakers have had to oversee. You know, the argument is often you've got to find that balance between regulating the risks of a technology, but doing so without stifling innovation, especially in a place like AI, where there is really a global race to be the leader. How do you find that balance?
So one way is to put in a process-oriented approach, making the federal government and companies think about the AI they're deploying and how they themselves make sure that the AI they're using doesn't harm people. Another, as mentioned earlier on your show, is to make sure that our existing legal structure can go after harms caused by AI, whether it's discrimination in hiring or in the giving out of loans. And then if those things don't work, then we're going to have to look at a firm regulation to simply say you can't do certain things with AI, or if you cause certain harms, we're going to make sure you can get sued.
And we know this isn't an issue going away anytime soon. We'll continue to track it. We appreciate you taking the time to join us this morning. Congressman Ted Lieu, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Generative AI was center stage last week at the World Economic Forum in Davos. Now leaders must focus on turning the hype and investment from 2023 into actual value, all while governments examine just how much regulation is needed for the new technology. Here to discuss where AI goes from here as part of Yahoo Finance's theme week, the AI Revolution, we welcome in Tom Davenport, President's Distinguished Professor of Information Technology and Management at Babson College. Thanks so much for being here, Tom. So I would start with how this all becomes real. A lot of the talk that we heard last week was a lot of big talk about how much Gen AI is going to play into these businesses. But I'm looking at sort of actual deployment and monetization. Where are we in that cycle, and how are we going to see that play out?
Well, that's the right place to be looking, and you wouldn't see very much if you're looking in that direction. I did a survey at the end of last year sponsored by Amazon Web Services, and it suggested 6% of companies have any production deployment of generative AI. So lots of talk, but not much action yet.
And when you survey these chief data officers, Tom, these CDOs, and they talk about AI, granted, obviously, as you said, it's early days, early beginnings here, but what are kind of the benefits, the potential priorities, but also the roadblocks they call out to you?
Well, I think the primary activity now is in individual experimentation, and that's going to be hard to measure the benefits, and I think they're not ultimately going to be terribly large. If you look at use cases like customer operations, call centers, contact centers, I think there is likely to be a substantial amount of value. Automated code generation, I think, is going to yield a lot of value, although that's going to take some time, I think, to really settle into development processes. As you can see on the chart, R&D and none of the above are pretty low levels. So a lot of potential opportunity. The biggest, I think, barrier now is in the data and how organizations get their data ready for generative AI.
And how do they do that, Tom? How do they get good data sets? Because, you know, I know there's an enormous quantity of data being generated every second, but is it the right kind of data on the right kind of information?
Well, most organizations these days are interested in how do I train a generative AI model to deal with their own data and their own content. And unfortunately, they haven't really curated or managed that terribly well over time. So the organizations that did this successfully early on, companies like Morgan Stanley, they have a small army of people curating their investment reports and making sure they're accurate and up to date and not overlapping with other investment reports, because generative AI, as we know, if fed poor quality information, is going to give poor quality outcomes.
As you talk to these folks, Tom, across different companies, you survey these chief data officers, so they're at least experimenting with the technology. It's against the backdrop, Tom, of regulation. I'm curious how you see kind of regulation of this technology kind of playing out, at least here in the U.S. And do you believe, Tom, that American regulators and lawmakers have the background, the experience, frankly, the tech chops to regulate AI responsibly and effectively?
What do you think? I think we all know that they don't. And
I've seen the hearings, Tom. This is why I'm asking, because you watch these hearings, the tech execs get dragged up before Congress. It kind of often becomes sort of embarrassing for, frankly, everybody that's involved.
Yeah, I think that's mostly a show. Congress can't pass a budget, so they're not going to be able to pass meaningful AI legislation. I think the only good news for those people who want more regulation, and I am among them, is that I think it's likely that some aspects of the AI Act in the EU will be adopted by companies globally. Large companies have to do business in the EU no matter where they're based. And so I think many of them will adopt some of the AI Act regulations. But, there's also the issue of how do we enforce it? There was an interesting report in the Wall Street Journal this morning suggesting that, one of the few pieces of meaningful legislation we have in the U.S. comes out of New York. It's called Local Law 144 that regulates the use of AI in recruiting and hiring. And this regulation is basically not being enforced at all. Something like 18 out of 400 companies even did any sort of audit at all on it. So we have to put a regulatory infrastructure in place in addition to just passing the laws if we're going to be successful with it.
Well, and Tom, what do you think the urgency level is here on this? Because, we can sort of joke about Congress not really being up to the task, but I take the example of social media, which was not regulated and exploded. And I think one could argue there have been pretty darn negative consequences from the lack of proper regulation there. So how do you get this done? How do you light a fire? How do you make sure it's done properly?
How do you transform the current operations of the U.S. government? That's an issue that we're all wrestling with every day. As I say, I don't see that happening at a federal level, and it'll, I think, be somewhat chaotic if individual states and even cities start to pass AI legislation. So I kind of think regulation in the United States is a lost cause, but I do think there are some potentials for the AI Act having an influence on US-based companies.
Tom, it's a big, important topic. Thank you so much for joining the show today and helping us walk through it.
My pleasure. Thanks.
After the boom comes the reality check. AI was the term of 2023, but the big question this year, how will regulation play its part? Most agree the market needs a referee, a moderator, someone to balance opportunities and risk in this vast unknown terrain. But who's going to lead the charge? The EU has first mover advantage, agreeing to the contours of a sweeping new law to regulate the space, but the U.S. needs to catch up fast. The Biden administration issued its executive order, a pathway to a more expansive plan. How do these crucial guardrails evolve in the critical few months ahead?
This is the regulatory landscape for AI. The US has an executive order, the EU has actual legislation. So what are these and other nations doing to regulate risk? And what risks are driving that regulation? Yahoo Finance's Alexis Keenan has the details. Hey Alexis, something I know you're all across the board on.
I'm working on it, Rochelle. So yeah, this question about how much regulation is needed in the US, that's still a matter of opinion for some people. Some say that existing laws are adequate to curb the risks. But one risk, of course, became apparently clear yesterday after that deep fake impersonating President Biden told New Hampshire primary voters to hold off. So the deep fakes, these are one of the major risks that IP lawyers, tech lawyers talk about. Also, because of the speed with which they can upload and transpire online. Also, AI that impacts government infrastructure. That's another big area of concern for global nations. But let's take a look at the emerging global landscape as it concerns regulation. The EU, of course, was the first G7 mover, but it was really Singapore that was first out with regulation. It was then that the EU came out with its really what's trying to be comprehensive, sweeping antitrust, AI, I cover that a lot too, AI law. And what it does is it classifies AI into risk categories where you have high risk uses like medical technology, for example, requiring approvals before they are ever taken to market. There are also some AI uses, though, that are outright banned by this EU law. And by the way, this is just in draft form. It's agreed in principle, not fully approved. Things that go into that outright ban category are those national infrastructure applications, as well as manipulative algorithms. So the first part of this EU Act, it is expected to be adopted around the springtime, and then the rest of the Act, hopefully 6 to 24 months out. There was a leak of that law, the final draft of it also that came down the pike yesterday. As for the US and the UK, they're taking a much more hands-off, more lighter touch approach with legal proposals, legislation on the table. But the US so far taking this kind of ad hoc, more market-driven approach. Not surprising there. So far, the U.S. has no comprehensive law, not even one drafted, but there are also no state regulations on the table, but you have those existing laws. And the lawyers that I talk with in this space, they name things like product liability that governs accidents and injuries. They also talk about our existing copyright laws that is protecting creative works already, they say. But you also talked about the Biden administration's executive order that has some requirements around transparency for AI models, for those large language models that we've been talking so much about, also national security, and also requires some labeling of AI generated content. Now, UK carrying out some voluntary compliance tests. If they don't have success there, then they plan to regulate. Japan, for its part, it's participating in this G7 wide effort to gain some agreement among those nations in an AI framework that would then be more comprehensive across nations. China, for its part, it has a set of 50 rules. They too have no comprehensive legislation, no comprehensive regulation. They have these 50 rules that focus a bit more politically centered on things like news distribution, deep fakes, and chatbots, as well as data sets. So guys, that's kind of the landscape and where we stand right now, but so much more to come in 2024 and even 2025.
All right, well, we want to get to one of the big themes here at Yahoo Finance, and that is AI. It certainly has been driving the market's momentum as of lately, and you have to look no further than Nvidia. This stock has certainly been a standout so far this year, and especially looking at that one-year chart, where shares up just about 250%. So what could a company potentially derail some of the rally, some of the momentum that we're seeing in Nvidia? And for that, we want to bring in Dan Halley, our tech editor, who has closely been tracking what has turned out to be a phenomenal story right now for the markets, Dan.
Yeah, Nvidia basically is just, the AI king, right? And they have been for quite some time. I think, this is something that years ago when they first started investing in AI, the idea was they just went to universities and said, what can you guys do with these powerful graphics processors that we have? And AI happened to be one of the things that came up. And so, they began investing. Companies thought that they were crazy, and their own backers thought that they were crazy. They were like, why are you dumping so much money into this? It's paying off huge, right? They eclipsed the $1 trillion mark as far as market cap goes in June, and they were closing on a $1.5 trillion as of Friday. But there are some rivals out there, and I just want to go over a few of them here. The big ones really are AMD, which has been kind of a long time thorn in their side, and Intel. Surprisingly, Intel, and I say surprisingly only because they haven't done as well in the graphics card space at all. And so when you look at what Intel and AMD are doing, right now NVIDIA's best chip is the H100. AMD has the MI300, which they announced in December. Intel is working on their Gaudi AI accelerator. Those are going to be potential options that companies can use in place of NVIDIA's offerings. Now, it's important to note that NVIDIA, they are the leader when it comes to hardware. They're miles ahead of everyone else. It's going to take years for other companies to catch up. But on the software side, they're also huge. That's a big moat for them, where they have this CUDA software where companies can go out and build their own kind of AI platforms around this. And so that helps keep people wrapped into the NVIDIA system. So it's a big deal here. Hyperscalers also have their own chips that they're making that could also prove troublesome for NVIDIA.
Right, and Dan, I mean, we talk about AI all the time as this broad concept that is going to certainly revolutionize, change tech forever. Can you tell us, though, exactly how consumers can use AI right now? Where is it present in my fingertips, even?
So right now, it's funny, if you ask Intel, right, they announced this event, they had this AI Everywhere event.
Yeah.
And they have new chips where they have NPU, neural processing units. Those have been in the iPhone for a long time, right? Neural processing engine. So now they're in Intel chips, they're in AMD chips, they're in Qualcomm chips. So they're coming to laptops, desktops. They're coming to smartphones now. The new Samsung phone, the Galaxy S24, as well as Google's Pixel has them. You can expect Apple probably to get on the train more with generative AI. If you ask Intel what that means, though, they literally say, we don't know right now. We don't know yet. Developers have to come out with apps that take advantage of this. But there are some ways that you can take advantage of it. When you use your laptop or desktop, you can run generative AI apps on there. So if you want to do some generative AI with images or with text, the idea is that you would be able then to do it all locally. That means more security, more privacy, since you're not sending your data up to the cloud, it's all on device. That's with the laptop and desktop. Microsoft is doing that. On the phone with Samsung or Google, there's image generative AI where you can change around some photos. I can make myself look like I can slam dunk. I cannot. I can't.
You told me you could.
Well, yeah, that was a lie. So there goes all my integrity. But I can jump like an inch, maybe. But I can make it look like I'm a monster.
Jump an inch.
God, I got weak ankles. Weak ankles.
Well, thanks to generative AI, you can jump much higher, Dan.
I can live my dream.
Yeah.